Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Welcome, my darlings. Please sit down and enjoy. But leave the comfy chair for Ermine Case and the love seat for Darren and Jennifer Daw, my Patreon supporters. Lost in the Clouds by Bo Bandy. What I'm about to relate may come across as the ravings of a madman. At the very least, it might seem like the whimsy of a lonely daydreamer. In all fairness, I wouldn't ordinarily believe it myself, but I swear every single word of this earnest account is true. While reading my testimony, you may feel it is a farcical fantasy or a mischievous hoax. It is not. I am trapped in a place neither here nor there. I simply ask that you consider all of the details with an open mind. Scientists have long believed other dimensions and parallel universes could exist. What I stumbled upon floating high in the sky above the local mountain deserves no less logic or consideration. Driving home a few nights ago, I was stunned to see a rugged mountain range up ahead in the distance. It was incredibly high in elevation and covered in alpine snowcaps. While I know of several quaint mountains in the area, none of them are nearly as majestic as the one that loomed right in front of me. It was massive, and it had breathtaking peaks and glacial-carved valleys down below. Honestly, it was so surprising I did a double take. It didn't seem possible for such an epic wonder of nature to be so close to my home, unbeknownst to me. I'd made the same drive 100 times before and never saw it. Upon closer inspection, however, I realized it was really just an optical illusion. A nebulous cluster of clouds were perched relatively low in the horizon. They tricked my eye into believing the real mountain beneath it was infinitely taller than it actually was. The top of the ridgeline was so obscured by a thick blanket of fog that it appeared there was a frosty snowcap, perched thousands of feet higher up in altitude. I smiled at the coincidental camouflage that initially misled me and continued on home. The thought of such magnificent terrain nestled way up in the clouds started me to thinking, what if? It was a wonderful, albeit temporary escape from my mundane personal life. I spent a few more moments on the grandiose idea of scaling the ice-shrouded behemoth, and then moved on to more practical matters. Admittedly, I didn't give it another thought until my routine commute back home the following night. The stunning topographical illusion was back again, and, if anything, it looked even more breathtaking than the first time. I marveled at how alluring and charismatic it appeared, but obviously I knew it wasn't real. It couldn't be. Yet it looked as solid as the pavement beneath my tires. There was no mountain of that splendor for over 1,000 miles, but I was still hypnotized by its deceptive lure. Nightfall was still 2 hours away. I entertained the fanciful notion of driving towards it, just to see when the mirage would fade. I had nothing better to do. Back and forth I went in my mind, for and against the idea. When I approached the crossroads of my planned destination and the route to the mountain, I made the whimsical and regretful decision to change course and head straight towards the seductive peak. Of course, I was driving towards an actual mountain a few miles away, but the difference in height of what I saw was night and day. I'd been to the top of John's Mountain many times, but honestly, it was a little more of a molehill in comparison to the stunning phantom monolith I was drawn to. The imaginary extensions dwarfed the modest real mountain below that I was used to seeing. At some point, I knew the blacktop would end, and the rocky illusion would fade away. I guess I just had to see it for myself. I knew the road well enough, leading to the top, but the extra heavy cloud cover present created an additional level of confusion. Some curves in the highway were less familiar than others. Many of the caution signs seemed new. Once I reached the true summit of John's Mountain, I expected the winding roadway to continue back down the other side. Surprisingly, the rugged asphalt just kept going forward. From that pivotal point forward, everything I saw was completely new. The sensation of driving on a road I knew had actually ended many miles back. My car continued up the winding lane, and I took in the phantom scenery as if it were real. Slowly as I climbed in altitude, the lush vegetation gave way to frost, and then heavy snowfall. My car didn't have winter tires installed, but in light of the total lack of reality I was experiencing, I didn't believe it mattered. Everything was a stark, raving hallucination, as far as I was concerned. It had to be. I was almost tempted to sit back and let the mirage take me where it wanted to go, but I also felt a gnawing need to maintain some semblance of control. The steering wheel offered me that illusion. The scenery going forward was fantastically picturesque, but what I saw in my rearview mirror turned my blood to ice. The road behind me slowly dissolved into a misty haze of nothingness. There was nowhere to turn the car around and no place left to return to. Apparently, I was on a one-way excursion to the top of a phantom peak in the foggy realm of unexplained fantasy. Of course, I could have just stopped the vehicle, but that wasn't going to be a long-term solution. I was in the middle of a postcard-like fairy tale odyssey. I kept weaving around the mountain road, through the frigid wilderness, hoping it eventually led back down to reality at some point. It didn't. Then I reached the end of the line. The narrow wheel ruts I'd been straddling in the virgin snow for the past few minutes ended. I judged myself to be at least 1,000 feet from the summit. I watched in horror as the clouds completely sanitized my path. The entire road and all evidence of my trek evaporated. It was as if I'd always been in this frozen wasteland. I was ill-prepared to travel on foot in permafrost, but I did have a blanket to wrap around me and some hiking boots in the trunk. It made survival at least temporarily possible. I don't know what fantasy dimension of hell this is, but I still have hope it intersects with the real world at some point. I'm sending this urgent plea for help via my cell phone. I have the modest shelter of my car, and some food and basic supplies. Perhaps a rescue helicopter can fly up here and free me from this icy hell before I become permanently entombed. Please, I'm trapped on a phantom mountain in the sky. So quoth this raven. 1,100 Tongues by Bo Bandy. The ability to speak other languages and dialects has always been an invaluable skill. Those who are able to communicate with people from foreign lands helped open up the world of trade and commerce. For thousands of years, translators bridged the complex labyrinth of different tongues. Now, with the aid of modern technology, anyone can do it. Swallowing a single pill from a pharmaceutical company can open up the mind to every single language and dialect on Earth. Despite these amazing advances in science, it's perhaps a perfect metaphor for the Old Testament's tree of knowledge. Sometimes knowing is worse than not knowing. Philosophers had long dreamed of finding a means of transferring the acquired knowledge from one individual to another. The difficulty, accumulation of education and life experience is always lost at the moment of death. The ambitious goal of science was to unlock the brain's storage system, to share what we know with others who do not know. Eventually, that impossible dream was achieved through research and study. It opened up the whole of humanity to an exponential amount of learning in a fraction of the normal time it takes to acquire it. Eventually, there will be a pill for everything. The scientific community achieved this curious process by deciphering the electrochemical-based storage method the brain uses to retain memories. Once the biological system of liquid consciousness was understood, it was but a few years before they began experimenting with full memory transfer. The idea was sound enough, but the execution was initially crude and piecemeal. Mistakes were made. It was a case of trying to run before they could even crawl, metaphorically. Sharing the thoughts, dreams, and personal memories of different human hosts requires a finesse in the data transfer that the initial experiments didn't allow for. It also created irreversible identity confusion for the recipient. A mysterious form of schizophrenic psychosis was encountered after a few months. The ensuing wave of mass murderers and suicide turned the world upside down. 1100 tongues was a popular mega-linguistic pill. It was an expensive, all-in-one dose of the world's known languages. It included current and dead languages, alternate dialects, and even some complex computer programming languages. Also embedded inside these brain cell recordings were untranslated samples of individuals speaking in tongues, both the flowery unknown words of those said to be filled with the heavenly spirit, and also the dark, possessed ignorance of tormented, exorcised souls. Essentially, the manufacturers of the pill just threw in these random language samples as a bonus. There was a significant delay in the onset of its highly destructive mental characteristics. That delay had the unfortunate side effect of infecting millions of people in the interim. No one wanted to be left behind without the communication benefit of the language pill. So tens of millions bought and consumed it. Word of mouth spread like wildfire about the amazing benefits of taking 1100 tongues. Overnight, the world became an interconnected place. Knowledge was shared. Alliances were forged. People all over the globe finally understood each other in direct ways, which was impossible before. At first, there was an amazing peace and understanding across the planet. It was wonderful seeing the level of human harmony. Then came the dark corridors of confusion, chaos, insanity, and eventually, death. Voices were heard inside the minds of the people, whispering, chanting, wailing, screaming, blood-curdling shrieks of furious agony, demands for violence. It became too much for many. They took their own lives to silence the internal madness. For the rest, the demonic whispering became louder and more insistent. The lines of reality grew increasingly blurred from lack of sleep and essential serotonin replenishment. These unexplained voices spoke in the unfamiliar, sinister tongues of the unfortunate possessed. Their handful of understandable words, among the cacophony of indecipherable utterances, carried an immense amount of murderous suggestion. It was irresistible. Worse still, it was determined that even hearing or reading transcripts of these inhuman tongues was enough to infect others. Ai, Kampa, Karua, Hawaii, Jew, Shikar, Murder, kill, kill, kill! So quoth this raven. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.